Don't you hate when you go look for a blog that you wrote out and you forget when, and then also you forget not only when, but you hit the keyword you think you used and it's no longer there? Holy cow. Talk about being pissed off at yourself. So, I was reminiscing about a particular conflict, and I couldn't find the blog. I was actually going to re-blog it and do the whole thing, but I guess I'm going to repost it, so I'm going to have to do a separate video blog now instead of a written one. When I was given space over at the Red Barn Flea Market by my friend to promote Access Sanctuary and Chapels, I would have a small little, I wouldn't have the whole area to myself. I'd have a section of a kiosk on the outside. So I'll be flying my flag and of Coexist and selling, doing the gift thing and all that. And the funny part was, you could tell who the Christians were by the way they looked at my table, because I had a lot of different occultic or esoteric symbology on my table for those who are from the uncommon and minority belief systems. So you could tell who the Christians were because those who have been educated on occultism or their version of it, they'll be sitting there studying every little, there's a pentacle, there's a little, Mother Earth, or here's Gaia, here's an Ankh, that kind of stuff. So they kind of poke around, like, I know what that is, I know what that is. So they're easy to spot. They're kind of too easy, to be honest with you. I mean, it's kind of like you might as well paint a cross in your forehead. So, they try to be coy, they try to be sly, and that's the funny part about, at least the Christians I deal with. They are as devious as they can be, and as tolerant as I am of them, I find it amusing how hypocritical they are just by their actions. Now they're saying all Christians? No, the ones I deal with, the ones I bump into. So there was another fellow who was sitting there browsing about, but he didn't have that intensity, but he was still poking around. And I get a text message. Now I keep my phone on vibrate when I'm working or doing things, so I had a little vibrate, and I check, and it says preacher. So we and I had some small talk, and once I got my text, I put my phone back, and I said, I smiled. I stood up and I smiled, and I was like, I was not aware I was in company of a preacher man. And I had my smile, I had my little smirk. If I could have horns grow out my head, they would have popped out. And I shit you not, the guy physically backpedaled away from my table. How did you know? Who told you? What's going on? He's looking around like like the boogeyman are talking to me and bullshit. I mean, the guy really freaked out, and it was kind of funny. And I said, don't worry about how I found out. So his own belief system kicked in about the supernatural, and then logic kicked in after, because after 5 minutes of questioning me, he decided to ask the obvious question: who texted you? But he literally freaked out, which was kind of amusing. I guess those who believe in the spaghetti monster in the sky will believe in the submarine sandwich underneath their bed. And so I go off and I said, well, let's just chalk it up as confession, and I'm not going to relinquish that information. So his name was Reverend Jim. And what he was not a preacher, as he told me. He was an evangelist. He would go to different churches and study what they have to say, and then he'll go off and preach the good word according to what he thinks is right. And according to what he thought was right was the red words of the Bible. And I was like, the red words of the Bible? It's red words. Well, there's a particular Bible out that certain groups use, that the red words are actual words from Christ. problem is, one of my defenses, one of my tactics I use against a lot of different people in religion is a timeline. Meaning, at this particular time frame this happened, and this time frame that happened, so on. Even you have a timeline, when you're born and when you die. So, what was so special about this particular conversation was, I said, well, most people haven't lived past the age of 40 or 50 years old back then. Correct me if I'm wrong. He agreed with me. And then I told him the first tomes of Christianity weren't written until approximately 120 to 300 years after Christ's death. And he still shook his head. Now, if you can add 1 plus 1, you would know there's a problem with the red words of the Bible. Because 3 to 5 generations have passed, who wrote it and who witnessed those words? So that was my question to the man. So he started quoting me John. Well, John, this and that. I said, I'm sorry, Jim. I'm asking Jim, not John. A parakeet can recite the Bible. It has an equal amount of meaning to anyone who else recites it. All you're doing is spitting out verbiage that you just memorized. Now I'm just asking you a question. Who wrote those words if someone who is 150 to 300 years older than the average person? Who witnessed it? So, he stuttered, he stammered, he didn't know what to do. We asked more questions back and forth. God was love explained to me why Sodom and Gomorrah was such a tree-hugging event. And if we have to worry about hell in the afterlife, why would I have to worry about hell in the afterlife if you have to worry about God coming down on, like, say, Sodom and Gomorrah, that kind of stuff? So I just bombarded him with basically the contradictions of the Bible, which is not too hard to do because the Bible's full of contradictions. So you just go off, and I'm hitting him left and right. I'm like, so if I was to, piss God off and not do as he says, then I'm supposed to cannibalize his children. And again, down the line I go. And the guy was starting to get, like, emotionally beaten up. And I'm just asking questions like a 3-year-old. Why is this happening? Why is that? Why? So, anyway, he started to almost have an emotional breakdown. He was kind of almost going to like a fetal position. I actually had to talk him out of it. I had to say, hey, come back to me, Jim. I'm just asking questions. That's all I'm doing. Anyway, when the Reverend Jim finally gathered himself up, he felt it was time for him to leave. Of course, as he was leaving, he kept looking back. This is my entertainment. Because it's not the person's knowledge you can go after. In this particular case, is when someone presents himself to be knowledgeable, that you can confront him on it. And at that point, they kind of lose themselves. And also in the psychology, when you're dealing with somebody who I would call a Rush Limbaugh, meaning when Rush Limbaugh, he's a powerful man behind the microphone. People listen to his monologues, but that's what they are, monologues. If you go off and you have someone in debate, like Rush Limbaugh, which happened, he did a talk show, people confronted him against his anti-homosexuality. People confronted him on, it wasn't his anti-homosexuality stance and gay bashing. And when he was confronted with it, he did the same thing. He stuttered, he stammered, he didn't know what to do because now he's being faced with his own music, his own words. He had to basically defend himself. So when I go off and I'm dealing with people, you're going to have to study them, have a quick read, how size them up. Well, with my Reverend Jim, he was funny because he was used to being behind the podium pointing the finger at you to tell you how to live according to God's will. Which, of course, my philosophy is a little different. But when he went off and, he couldn't handle that. He just couldn't deal with it. the questions, and and like I said, I'm not. Religions in the world, to me, there's nothing wrong with them. It's just the people in them that are fucked up. So it's always fun to bump into a fucked up person and kind of play them at their own game. But when he left, the people around me knew who he was. This is Reverend Jim. They didn't know he was a reverend at the time. All of these people worked for Walmart. Now, they're all gone, quit, fired, whatever, so I can talk about it. But this guy would come by, he would find damaged product on the floor and demand it to have it for like 2 cents to the dollar, and of course they would say no, and he would threaten their jobs, literally. I'm going to go call Arkansas and have you fired. Well, he went on another tirade. He's done this before where people got to recognize him. It was like people were taking turns as to who wants to deal with this fucking idiot. And then one day this lady popped out of nowhere and said, "You're supposed to be a pastor, you're supposed to be a reverend. How can you act like this and preach the word of the Lord?" And that's when everybody took note. They already knew his face, now they know his title. So he acted like the biggest asshat when he's not behind the podium. And now that he's been recognized as such, those who find him would go off and say, "Hey." So what a perfect fucking setup. And I didn't know the backstory until like an hour later, because I was still just giggling over the fact that I almost put an evangelist into a mental breakdown. And that's the best part about what I am, or what I claim to be, because half of my paradigm, I don't say half, but a substantial percentage, you don't really develop your strength unless you do have conflict, because through your conflict you better define yourself and in yourself as to how you explain yourself or how you debate. And that's a different strength. That's something that we work on, because a lot of people who are considered mamby-pamby or fluffy don't, because they clam up and they boo-hoo, and and of course they do the pity parties and hand holding and hugging trees and dancing with butterflies. That's fine for them, but they don't they don't stand up too well when dealing with conflict. Now, when you got people who do deal with conflict on the internet in real life, you know how to articulate yourself, you know what to look for, and you know how to use it. And that's the better part about me, or my paradigm, which is the left-hand path. But the funny part was, and it had nothing to do with him being an evangelist, that was kind of humorous, but I'd be lying if I said it fully. I have to admit, a little guy in red popped up and went, "Do it, get up!" And then the other one's like, "Nah, you got to be the better person." And I chose to be the better person because, I'm there promoting Access Sanctuary Chapels. I'm there to promote religious tolerance. And here I am dealing with a person who is most evident was not a tolerant person, not accepting, but yet would be preaching otherwise on a Sunday afternoon. So that's the beauty of dealing with what I deal with in real life. I took sabbatical from the flea markets and meeting people. For one main reason, I went back to school. School's ending this week. I'll be back at the markets shortly. You'll be seeing my flags, banners flying, and what have you. So basically, the moral of the story is, if you're going to be two different people, don't let two different worlds or people from two different worlds meet up with you, because they'll know the full story of who you are. Another topic, well, I got you at 14 minutes. I was told by a couple of friends of mine that I share too much of myself, almost unabridged, and that might set some people off. I want that, and I'll tell you why. Imagine, if you would, and a good example are the evangelists, especially the tele-evangelists. Look at the ones that failed. Jimmy Swaggart, big anti-promiscuity and what have you, and he's picking up street hookers and fucking them. He didn't have the intestinal fortitude or forethought to just get an escort service. He had to go to the streets and pick up a street whore. Then you have a guy named Ted, who's anti-homosexual stance, who happens to meet with young male prostitutes at the hotels. So basically, you know, when you are two-faced, or you don't have, this is probably the answer to my two friends, which is Allison and Linda, and that is, you know where I stand on my Rev.Ronald French channel, my Trinity channel, for the main reason that, and I learned this from my industrial security program I took many moons ago at University of Massachusetts. In the University of Massachusetts, it talked about how you get clearance and top secret clearance. They take a psych test, MPPI test, or MPII test, which is a psychological evaluation. And they said, if you're a closet homosexual, and it will find out that you are, you will not get clearance because you are not out. You can be openly gay in the government, and they'll be like, and then you're openly, you know, and you're gay in your test, Shazam, you get clearance. There's nothing for you to be blackmailed on, or to, you know, to be blackmailed is the main issue with them, or to, you know, or be bribed or whatever. So my mentality, and this is back in 1993, was about full disclosure. When I have debates with certain individuals on the internet, whatever, first thing they say is, we're going to expose you. Go right ahead. And that's the best part about what I do and who I am. I'm full disclosure. There's very little skeletons in my closet. Maybe a bone or two, but you really have to be like 30 years of knowing me to know those. You get what I'm saying? But other than that, ta-da. You know, I made a riddle for those people who said they're going to find out who you are. I said, I'll give you a riddle. I went to jail 165 times in 3 years. I never was arrested, and I was never convicted. Well, if you don't know the answer, I'll just tell you I was in law enforcement. You know, so it's really hard to dig up dirt when you're, you know, former military, former law enforcement. You know, basically, if you did anything really bad, you definitely would know about it. And, you know, obviously I have a criminal record. So when you're dealing with people who try to dig up dirt on me, it's like, well, go ahead. You got my name, here's my address, here's my phone number, dig away. And that's the thing, they can't. So if sharing myself too much with you is too much, that's fine. But there are only two people out of about, I don't know, 2,000 immediate people and 20,000 other readers. Not worried about it. The reason why, if I'm setting people off, I'm offending people, I would rather have people who are offended for the right reasons than like me for the wrong. And that's how I see it. Now when I'm dealing with people like Jim, well, Reverend Jim is known as Reverend Jim with his followers, but they don't see him acting like the biggest asshat at Walmart. If I act like an asshat at Walmart, people go, oh, we know that Rev.Ronald French. There's a big difference. How much of a difference? When I was elected vice president of my student council in school, which is ending for summer break shortly, I was elected vice president as Reverend Ron. So there you have it. Look at the video. It was called Two Worlds Colliding or Crossing. I don't hide who and what I am as a reverend. I don't hide who I am as myself being a reverend. And there you have it. This is probably why I thought of Jim all day today. And this happened about a year or two ago. And again, I did a blog about it and I couldn't find it. And I was still reminiscing over it. And I said, you know, I got to do this video. And then that was pretty much about it. I was a little proud of myself. It was the first time I actually had a bout, if you would. But the guy was very, very melodramatic. You know, how did you know? And when you got people like that, it's hard not to go and get a fishing rod and start casting out the bullshit and reeling them back in, you know? But I hit them up with logic instead. And when you hit people like that with logic, you fuck them up more and harder, because at that point, once they acknowledge your logic and accept what you're saying is true, and then they have nothing to fight you against, because what they're preaching is whatever, it's not logical. It fries them, it cooks them in the brain, because they're expecting you to follow what they say. I bumped into another preacher not too long ago at Walmart, of all things. I forgot what I was doing. I think I was getting my battery replaced. And I bumped into a guy who's a local pastor of a local church. Now, I talk to people like I talk to this camera as you're watching this. Sometimes I'm more vulgar. And sometimes preachers will revert back to how they act in church, in the public eye. Now, what am I getting at? Some evangelists, if you ever see, do some fucked up shit. And some are very outlandish in their body language and how they present themselves, and ooh, you know. I mean, I'm gonna do the bug eye, but that's about it. I'll do that too to see what the fuck I'm looking, where the camera's at. So, but when I go off and I talk just the same way. And I had this guy who was an evangelist or pastor of his own church, and he and I were chit-chatting, and we chit-chatted about ideology for a while, but once we started talking about religion just for giggles, he started to twitch and twang, and he started to you know, his legs shot out from underneath him, and he's kind of, you know, like, and to me, psychologically, it's a ploy to get your attention. Like, I say the words "fuck you" and "eat shit and die" or whatever, that catches your attention. It's like, fuck, this guy's talking crazy shit. He's swearing like a longshoreman. But he's got a message. You got to listen to him anyway. Now, those who don't have a mouth like a longshoreman, they go off and they do cartoon fucking gestures. They dance around, ooh, and ah, and I got your attention, woo, you know, whatever the fuck it is. That's their method. You know mine. Imagine this conversation at Walmart. I'm having a conversation with a guy who acting like he's got an epileptic freaking seizure going on in the waiting room. Yeah, this is real world shit. And this is what I deal with. And people tell me I'm too fucking open or too whatever. Well, that's fine. But when you deal with the duality that is that fucked up, or they don't know, or one can't really work well in the other, that's when I know it's fail. That's when I know I can be me as a preacher, as a pastor, as a, you know, sinister minister, if you would. And I can still be me at my school. I can still be me working at my shop or working what I'm doing. And yet, I have people out there who work as a worker. They act crazy and fucked up as a preacher. And then they have the real world that they live in for themselves. But somehow, if you cross them over, you don't really see how they really coincide with one another. Imagine if this guy who worked, I think he worked at a major corporation, blue collar, but it's a big industry where I'm at here. And I won't divulge that information or where he works, because I don't want people to look for him. But if he was in his plant talking to people and twitching the fuck around to get their attention, they would bounce his ass the fuck out. So that's the part about me being me. I'm just me. Take care.